panelists who are going to share a little bit about what Nature's Notebook looks like in their location with their questions and their audiences. So just an overview of today's session. It'll be about an hour long. We might run over maybe 10 or 15 minutes if we have a lot of questions. But we're going to start with 4 examples from around the country. We have Nikki Julian from Maricopa County Cooperative Extension in Arizona presenting on their efforts on the Phoenix Phenology Trail. Then we have Jamie Morin. She's from the New York Botanical Garden and is doing a phenology project with their living collections. We also have Mary Gossarin and Becky Cow from the Denver Botanical Garden and their phenology trail that started at the garden and has seemed to have spread beyond. And then Susan Sachs, whose effort at the Great Smoky Mountains has been going on for a while and then also has more recently become part of the AT Seasons project. So after those 4 10-minute talks about the efforts going on, the projects going on in those locations, we'll have just a quick overview of some resources on our website for phenology leaders, and then we'll leave the most time at the end for a question and answer session with all of the speakers. So save your questions till the end, and we'll see when we get there. I guess you can definitely chat in any questions that you have along the way, and we'll read those out at the end. And because we're a small-ish group, we might be able to unmute and just have more of a conversation. Okay, so without further ado, we'll jump into Nikki's presentation. Let me get that up. Does that work? Mm-hmm. Okay. Great, and then do you want to just take it away, Nikki?
Great.
And I'll advance the slides for you.
Fantastic. Can you hear me all okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. So my name is Nikki Julian. I'm with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension in Maricopa County, and I am one of the sites on the Phoenix Phenology Trail. So we can go to the next slide. So I got started with some citizen science projects a couple of years ago, and just kind of started doing field testing, in my own yard, doing some rain log, iNaturalist, monarch watch, different things like that, to kind of see how, how easy, how difficult, how user-friendly they are, and then kind of spread out from there. I have what I've been finding with citizen science is it meets a lot of different needs. So I can learn about queens and monarch butterflies, and I can put the information on several different citizen science projects at once. And so I really like that idea of helping for giving out information or supplying data for more than one need, which was, I think, a really awesome thing to do. But I also really wanted citizen science to be educating the public as well. So when I developed a phenology trail at the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension, one of the things I wanted to really, sorry, that was my ear. One of the things I really wanted to focus on was looking at different species that were very much alike but a little bit different. So the queens and monarch were a really good example of that. This is one of the sheets that I have in my phenology notebook for people who use the phenology trail at the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension. This is a great way for them to learn species that are in our area, often commonly confused, but it also gets people to look at these species a little bit closer. So we can go on to the next slide. This is the map just off Google Maps of the Cooperative Extension site. And what I did was just point out where the different plants are. I have 4 different plants, 4 different animals, 4 different birds, 4 different insects, sorry, 4 different birds, 4 different plants. So this is one of the visuals that I have in my notebook for people to use, and that's accessible for everyone. But what I found, we have a lot of volunteers that come into the Cooperative Extension either for Master Gardeners or 4-H or Master Watershed Stewards but I wasn't getting people kind of connected to it, so I really needed to have a day where I explained what phenology was. So go on to the next slide. We hosted a training session. Lorianne came out and hosted a training session for us where we learned a little bit about what phenology was. We went out and took some data, and then we also had a time for brainstorming why we were collecting data, what kind of questions did we want answered, and what we would do with those questions. Like, we had to make a reason for collecting the data, otherwise it was just data being collected. So it was really well-attended session. And we had a lot of people very, very interested in phenology, either setting up their own sites at home or sites at different places. This is one of our partner rangers at one of our partner sites. He's going to set up a phenology trail as well. So kind of from that beginning, we decided to start creating a Phoenix phenology trail. So if you go on to the next slide, we'll see some starts of that. The Phoenix Phenology Trail meetings are now hosted by the Conservation Alliance, which is an organization that has the power to bring together land managers, scientists, and county parks to look at the Phoenix Phenology Trail, a larger site. So Phoenix is a large city. We're spread out over a long, large geographical area. And we knew that coming together, we wanted to have several species that were in common so that we can look at, not just one spot in the valley, but how weather and climate change is affecting our whole valley. So our first couple meetings, we introduced what the Phenology Network was to our partners. And then we looked at what kind of models we wanted to base ourselves off of, like the California model, or Tucson or Portland models. And then we also started to look at what are our goals and objectives, who will monitor, how do we do that, and just getting some brainstorming and orientation. You can go on to the next slide. Then at our next meeting, we started to be a lot more specific about what kind of species we wanted to choose. We realized that each spot has its own effort. It can be individual, and we can choose as many species as we wanted to, but we also wanted some species that were common throughout the whole Phoenix Phenology Trail. So for example, the saguaro is really, really important to all of us in Phoenix, and we're trying to get a really broad base of how saguaros are being affected by weather patterns. So that's one of the species that we've already identified. Yes, we'll all do that one. But we also we were looking at what our goals were for across Phoenix. And each partner group has different goals. So I have a different goal of cooperative extension. Mine is to educate the public. That's the most important thing for me. At the Desert Botanical Garden, there's a lot of, they want to do education as well, but they also want to look at diversity. We have a lot of our scientists and researchers at the Desert Botanical Garden have species that they're specifically interested in, like agaves or saguaros. So that's very interesting to them. That brings them into the project. And we also want to get people just involved in going out there. So our county parks, one of the things they're looking at is how do we get people actually being involved? How do we take just a visitor to the park to be a citizen scientist? And then we also started looking at what are specific sites. So we can go on to the next slide. So far, the cooperative extension is the one site that's connected with the NPN website, but that will be changing very soon. We'll have the Desert Botanical Garden will be on there, hopefully in the next couple months. And then as our other partners develop their sites, they'll also connect with the Phoenix Phenology Trail. So next slide on this one. And this is me. This is how to get in touch with me. Again, my name is Nikki Julian. I work for the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension in Maricopa County. And I wanted to touch on just really quickly to the benefits I'm seeing is even though our phenology trail just started and we're not really all that public yet, I'm already seeing people at the table, land managers who have really never talked to scientists before, and it's amazing to see them be interested in this process and seeing what the National Phenology Network can offer in terms of being a tool to bring people together. So that having land managers see the value in taking this data is just excellent. We're also talking about who our people resources are and how we can get volunteers to collect reliable data, but also to inform the public that they can also offer reliable data. And we know that that gives a lot of returns to our places. We know that people will then care for these places more, come back to these places more, and then the projects can be a lot more self-supporting with this as well. So I think I've gone through all that, and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Nikki. That's a wonderful overview, and it's great to hear about the outcomes that you're seeing and the folks that you have engaged. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
Hi, all. I'm Jamie Morin. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, perfect. So I am the assistant curator at the New York Botanical Garden, and I work in plant records to help both my department and curation manage the flow of plant information and how it's held in our database. I also work with our wonderful volunteer services department to help coordinate the Living Collections Phenology program here at the garden. So a little bit about our institution. We were established in 1895, and the site was really chosen because it has dramatic topography, exposed rocks. The Bronx River bisects the garden, and there was 40-acre parcel of uncut old-growth forest at the heart of the garden's 250 acres. So really, that was kind of the big part of the founding of our institution. And since then, we've developed the 200 acres around the forest into 52 formal gardens, horticultural displays, and systematic plant collections that are useful in research, education, as well as beautiful. So we have quite a history of phenology at the New York Botanical Garden. We've had a forest phenology program focused in that center 50 acres that began in 2001 and has been really kind of developing ever since. In 2009, they began offering citizen science professional development for middle school teachers who wanted to create and use real-life data in the classroom. And then the Living Collections Online project, which I'm largely involved with, started its program in the spring of 2012. And then when I got here in winter of 2013, we kind of readjusted it and changed the goals a little bit. And that continued into this season. And we began reporting to the National Phenology Network when we readjusted in 2013. So our first effort, that 2012 effort, the main goal was to develop content for an online plant information system for public engagement. And it divided those 200 acres outside the forest into 6 sections, and each of those sections had 1 or 2 volunteers assigned to monitor all of the phenology for that section, largely using display labels and accession labels, which we use to tag all of our plants in the living collection. But the problem with that is that the volunteers found the sheer volume of work to be done really overwhelming. So, for example, one area over by the perennial garden had over 1,000 taxa, which is species and cultivars, and over 33,000 individual plants. So that was really, really overwhelming. As you can see in this picture, this is part of our daffodil collection, and we have 100+ cultivars of daffodils alone, and I can't even imagine trying to look at all of those individually in one go. So using that feedback from our volunteers, we restructured it that winter into spring 2013, and we kind of reevaluated the main goal. So now we're really looking to gather accurate, consistent data for both internal and external use. So what I did is I developed a series of walks consisting of 20 to 35 observation stops that, for the most part, never change. We really tried to simplify the observations, so we took away the frequency monitoring because that was a really big sticking point for our volunteers. They were trying to count they were trying to count individual flowers or seeds, and that was just way too much. And we really wanted to decide on the most important taxa to observe, which includes NYBG collection needs and external needs for institutions like the National Phenology Network. So this is an example of one of our newest walks. This one was added for this year. The top two pictures are Magnolia solangiana and Magnolia zenii. These are really significant to the New York Botanical Garden collections, but not necessarily national data. But we also include plants like Acer rubrum, Liriodendron tulipifera, and Magnolia virginiana, which are important to us, but they're also important on a more national scale. So we try to have a really good balance of key NYBG collection plants, things that are really big in our landscape, like our magnolia collection, as well as really broad-ranging plants. We do a lot of training. I think that's probably one of the most fun and engaging parts of our program. In early March, every volunteer trains with a plant records staff member or volunteer services staff member. Sometimes they come in groups, sometimes individually, depending on how much training they feel they need and their schedules. New volunteers kind of get an overview of the program, so we'll go over what phenology is, different phenophases, the procedures, et cetera, and how to collect data. We'll go step by step at each plant and look at every phenophase for each plant on their stop. And then our returning folks kind of get reminders and tips to help refine what they're doing. And we'll go on a walk through their plants, but we won't stop at everything. Usually we'll just go over any changes from the year before, and we'll also go over any remaining questions from the year before. So sometimes volunteers get confused on some definitions or what a phenophase looks like on a specific plant. So that's a really great opportunity to sort of check in and see how they're doing. Some of our volunteers have been forest phenology volunteers for forever, so they're kind of, set and forget. They go, they know what they're doing. Other volunteers, need a little bit more help to be comfortable with what's going on. In terms of data entry, we have plant record staff that organizes and eliminates any unusable data. So we'll clump the data by geographical area, so by walk. And then we'll pull out data sheets that don't have dates on them. Sometimes they have like really out there data because I just circled everything in the wrong category. So we'll kind of go through and vet that information. And then we'll add the data into our plant records database, which is BG-based, which is pictured here. So we use slightly different data and a different way of inputting it. And then we have a data entry volunteer that specifically uploads the National Phenology Network observations into Nature's Notebook. Last year we manually entered all of it, and this year we're going to try the bulk upload tool and see how that works for us. So we're really looking forward to that. This is a picture of our data sheets. So as you can see, it's set up really similarly to the way that the Nature's Notebook sheets are set up. We're still using printed data sheets because we have additional taxa. We can't just use the Nature's Notebook app. But the entry is largely the same. We just have an extra category for old flowers since we want to really get that whole arc of the flowering season. And then we have a really large notes section in the bottom, which is where we encourage people to do any frequency monitoring that they may feel is important if there's something seasonally quirky. So if there's really, really early color change, we want that subjective, is there color change or not, but we also want data that it's only one branch or only a few leaves. So that's kind of where that can be put in. So our biggest goal is really keeping it consistent. So each year, 90% of the walk's content remains the same. Because we are monitoring a living collection, it can be a little tricky. Things die or are removed or are moved, and so that might cause us to abandon them as observable material, but We try to add 3 to 5 new plants with each returning member walk every year. And this allows us to add really pointed, poignant taxa without being too overwhelming. Now it takes our volunteers with this revamped program maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours when they first start the walk, so when they're trying to learn all 30 plants at once, but by the end of the season or the middle of the season, it takes an hour or less usually, and that's really that time frame that we're looking for. So just to kind of go over where we've been and where we're going. In 2013, we had 13 volunteers. About half of them came from the program before, and the other half were new. A lot of them were already volunteering in the forest. They recorded 419 hours over 5 individual walks. Pictured here is the native plant garden. There's a walk that centers around our rock garden and our native plant garden. There were 135 individual plants that they observed with 110 species and cultivars. 49 of those contributed to National Phenology Network data. We had 819 entries into our database and over 11,000 into the National Phenology Network's database. And then this year we have 21 volunteers, 9 walks, so we added 4. We've upped that number of individual plants to 236 across 184 species and cultivars, and 73 of those are National Phenology Network now. So we're definitely trying to add more usable data for not only ourselves, but the National Phenology Network, and every year we kind of refine that process. So in the future, we'd like to add new volunteers, walks, and taxa. We really want to get that consistent data across years and years, because that's when it becomes really, really usable for the institution. And then we kind of want to keep refining that reporting and data entry process, as well as help our volunteers increase their training and get them more knowledge-based, because that makes them more excited about it, and it also gets us more accurate data. So I think that's it for me. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jamie. That was super. And I guess we can come back and answer questions at the end. I was thinking that folks might not know that since 2009, there's been a same family forest at the New York Botanic Garden has had a big forest phenology program, but not so focused on the flowers and the living collections like Jamie's talking about. There's kind of 2 programs going on there, which is cool. And I didn't know that there was volunteers moving back and forth across them. And so now we have another Botanic Garden, but they're actually, I think we'll see, doing a pretty different thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary Gosworn, and I'm not sure if Becky Kao is with her, if they're co-presenting. Okay, excellent. So we've got co-presenters from the Denver Botanic Garden, and I will pass the screen over to them so we can find out what's going on there.
So you want our PowerPoint then? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
You need to press that show my screen button first.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Nice, we can see it.
And you're not seeing the little organization block over it?
Nope.
Okay, good. So Denver Botanic, so Becky and I work in the Research and Conservation Department at Denver Botanic Gardens. We didn't really have a formal focus on phenology before Becky came a few years ago. So she brought her knowledge and interest in phenology to the gardens and tasked me with putting together a trail. So we're a public botanic gardens. We've got 3 sites currently. One in the city, our main location, and then one in our secondary location, which is more of a farm site, and then an alpine site where we partner with the U.S. Forest Service. So we captured 3 fairly different types of locations. Between the 3 of those sites, we track a total of 64 plants, which is comprised of 15 different species. Here's a map of where our locations are. York Street is our main urban location. Our farm location is here, and Mount Goliath is the site up on Mount Evans. We started our first phenology trail actually got it up and running with our first walk at the York Street Urban Gardens in 2013. And this is a map of the grounds with 20 of the plants here. There's also, we have a Mordecai Children's Garden is across the street from this location, and we have 6 of the plants there with an additional kind of a miniature version of the walk for children to become used to the idea or become familiar with the idea of phenology. I don't know why that keeps doing that. Anyway, so those are our plants located around the gardens at York Street. And then in the spring of this year, we opened our other 2 sites. The farm at Chatfield, which has 23 plants at it, and our Mount Goliath location with 15 plants. What I was trying to do with all of these walks was have multiples of each species so that we could see the variation and just within little microclimates at each location. And I also tried as much as possible to get to duplicate the species that are used across these 3 sites. That wasn't, with an alpine site, wasn't all that easy to do. There's only one species we have, the Achillea millefolium, that's at all 3 sites, but there are a handful of species that are at 2 of the sites. So we do have those comparisons to make. Our goals were to educate the public about climate change and how phenology is used to as a proxy for the effects of climate change on plants. We wanted to also educate them as to the importance of the observation data and how it gets used by scientists worldwide can access, or the public just for their own interest. So how citizen scientists working together can really compile a lot of information for people to use. And then we wanted to give them a place at the gardens to collect, to learn about phenology, to practice collecting it, and then once they, and report it, and then once they were comfortable with it, go on and collect information from everywhere else they are. The main challenges were finding the right plants. So my goal was to, I thought it was interesting that the New York Botanical, you do a lot of your own phenology that's not necessarily NPN species. I hadn't even thought about that. I was looking for species that were on NPN's list of tracked species, of which we had sufficient numbers so that I could have multiples of each species. My goal was 3 of each species, which sometimes was exceeded and sometimes was not met. But hopefully ones that we had sufficient numbers. I wanted them along paths so that our horticulturists weren't annoyed with people traveling into gardens to collect observation data. I wanted to change or to choose plants that were likely to remain part of our, quote, permanent collections because, as was mentioned, plants get moved around in gardens. So I coordinated with various gardeners to see which ones were likely to remain there. I wanted to capture a variety of plant families, so have some grasses and some evergreens and woody plants and herbaceous plants. So I tried to do that. And then mostly natives from representing our region. So here is one of the data sheets we made. Each species, as you can see, this one, well, this is for our Chatfield walk, the farm walk. I have 5 of the Acer negundo and 4 of this, 3 of this. So it really does vary. But so for each species, there are 1 to 5 plants where, and then people collect yes, no, or question mark data with more information of where they can find other information or access our website or NPN's website. And then on the back, I have some photos of some of the more complex stages to help in their observations and NPN's definitions of the phenophases that apply to the plants on that particular walk. We are working at putting together a complete photo diary of all of the phenophases of all the species on our walk so that we can put something together to really give people as much help as possible in IDing these things. So far, we've given several phenology presentations to various groups. It's been gratifying to teach people about phenology. Most people have never heard the word, and then they're surprised and intrigued to find out what it is and why it's important. Currently, our data is being reported by staff and volunteers. Our visitor participation is still in development, but we are on the cusp of opening our new science pyramid at the gardens. It'll be opening in a couple of weeks, and the whole goal of the pyramid is to highlight the garden's scientific endeavors, among which will be included the phenology trail. So that should bring much more awareness to the public in general. We'll have demonstrations of, as I said, all of our scientific endeavors, but there will be one specifically on phenology. There will be a 70-inch screen above the desk looping information about phenology, how it correlates with climate data, so you can really see the usefulness of it, different examples of phenophases. We'll have, our staff will take turns being out there manning it, and then we'll be training docents to take that task up part of the time too. And there will be various laminated sheets with photos and data visualization graphs and example data sheets, all that kind of stuff. In the winter time especially, we'll probably have herbarium sheets and live plants or cuttings so people can really look up close at what, you know, a grass flower actually looks like. And we'll have a tablet that visitors can use to go on to NPN's website and see what the data entry pages look like with somebody there to ask questions of. So on our progress, when I looked at, I pulled data from the Denver greater area of all of the reports that NPN had on plants in the greater area. So since 2012, which is when that's when we started collecting data, but comparing from, I looked at from 2010 to 2014. So in 2010, there were 185 observations. In 2013, there were 5,300, so that's quite an increase. And so far this year, we have 8,600 observations. So there's been a pretty good increase in that. And the annual number of reporters from 2010 to 2014 went from 1 to 7. Of those 7, 6 are either staff volunteers, or we now have one visitor. It was kind of fun to see that he was reporting data just as a member of the public, and then in the last couple of months joined Denver Botanic Gardens network on NPN. So he's officially tracking for us, which is cool. So that's our first kind of convert, but we hope to increase that a lot with the science pyramid. Well, I guess that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Mary. That's a great update, and it's exciting to hear about the science pyramid. You had mentioned it, but I didn't know kind of all the details. It's very cool.
It's going to be a pretty interesting thing.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to our final panelist presenter, Susan Sachs from Great Smoky Mountains, and I will give her the presenting controls.
All right. Hello, everybody. Susan Sachs here in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I'm located on the North Carolina side of the park, which, if you've been to the Smokies, it truly is the quiet side of the Smokies. And I'm trying to get my, there we go, get my screen to go into full screen mode so you can all see that better. And
yep, I think we can see it. Looks good.
Excellent. So let's see. So I just wanted to talk a little bit first about why we're doing phenology in the Smokies, and we view it as part of our overall climate change education strategy. And really what we want to try to do is get people involved in phenology monitoring, because we really want to keep the message about climate change local. And we've used citizen science as one of the best techniques to get people to have personal connection with the issue of climate change, especially in an area like we're in, and some of the other presenters are in, where the changes are a little more subtle. We're not coastal. We're not dealing with losing permafrost or melting glaciers or anything like that, but we definitely are seeing changes, particularly in the spring months of warming here in the southern Appalachian Mountains. So, we have a lot of different things we do about climate change education, but I'm just going to talk today about phenology. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the program that we have here in the Smokies is that we created locations of our plots in the Smokies, which is 524,000 acres, with our resource management staff. So they have something they call vital signs monitoring, which is trying to keep your pulse on what's happening in the park, whether it's changes because of exotic species, climate change, just all the different things that can impact a large land area without a whole lot of access. So they have primary and secondary watersheds that they've targeted, and what we did was try to find sites that were accessible by the public within those target areas for monitoring and pick a high, a mid, and a low elevation plot that we can do monitoring in. So you kind of see a map here of the Smokies with those primary and secondary watersheds. So at this point, we actually have about 38 different plots in the park, and we're using them for a variety of things. Some of them are actual plots that are 20 by 50 meters in size. Those are the ones that we use primarily with our field trip programs, mostly high school students, but we do get some middle school students as well. We have trails that are places where some of our ranger staff will lead public programs. We get close to 10 million visitors a year in the Smokies, especially in the summer and the fall. So we have incorporated that into just our, visitor in the park type programs. And then we have an Adopt a Phenology plot program where we have right now about 80 volunteers who are visiting our different sites. So some of these are plots, and like I mentioned, some are trail side. And you can see kind of on the bottom left here that we're monitoring trees using the National Phenology Network protocols. And then we have protocols that we've created for wildflowers, because we're mostly interested in peaks of bloom dates for species, not so much when one particular flower starts or stops, but when are our Trillium grandiflorum at their peak, or when are our spring beauties at their peak, something like that. For migratory birds, we are working primarily with the AT Seasons app. We have about 72 miles of the Appalachian Trail that runs through the Smokies. We also monitor salamanders in particularly our education plots, and we're currently developing a millipede phenology protocol, because we want to try to really encompass the entire food chain with our phenology monitoring. So we have salamanders as a top predator in the plot, millipedes, trees as a producer, and so forth. So we're using I'm going to focus more on what we're doing with trees. We're using the Phenology Network protocols, and when we have volunteer groups or student groups who are doing that monitoring, we give them a map of a plot that's showing them where trees are at. We give them a photograph of their tree that they're looking for. All the trees have flagging and labels on them. We've created an information sheet for the trees. So their species, it's going to show them what each phenophase looks like. And then our data that we're collecting, we're really, again, interested in when something's at its peak. So we have a little bit more information that we might ask for in certain categories than what's on Nature's Notebook. But we do put all of our data into Nature's Notebook, and our volunteers who have adopted a plot, they actually do that themselves. They all have their own accounts to enter data in our network of sites. But school groups, park staff actually enter the data for school groups and the public programs. This summer we started a program, a special summer camp program that's called Miles of Science. It's a partnership program with Montreat College. And for that program, these kids, they come into the park, a different group of 6 to 8 students each week over 6 weeks. And they're actually doing all their scientific research on the Appalachian Trail in the Smokies, hiking, spending the night out on the trail. and then uploading their data. Of course, they were here mostly in the summertime, and really the only phenology for the species that are on in that app were the birds. So they focused primarily on the birds for the AT Seasons app, and then actually uploaded the data themselves using Galaxy tablets that we had for them. So, just to wrap up, and I know I'm going through this pretty quickly, so I definitely welcome any questions. But for us, benefits for doing the phenology monitoring is that people, whether it's the public, school groups, students, it doesn't matter. People love to assist. They really enjoy contributing data. We love that it involves families. It gets people out in the park hiking. It's a really great link to local climate change impacts. A lot of people don't really think about, well, what does it mean when you have an early spring? And for us, it's been a really popular field trip, especially with high schools. Just last year alone, we saw over 3,000 high school students who wanted to collect data on phenology. So it's been a great addition to attract high schools, which can be a really hard audience if you're an organization that's trying to reach that particular age level. Some of the challenges, and I would say almost all of our challenges revolve more around the volunteer program that we have. We have about 80 volunteers, and just the managing those volunteers is very time-consuming. The volunteers who enter their own data do a great job, but when we have to enter data for the school groups and everything, we have a bit of a data entry backlog going on right now. And then just with the Adopt-a-Plot program, the seasonality of phenology, people tend to take a lot of time off in the summer, and it's proving difficult to get them re-excited in the fall. They did a great job in the spring, but now that it's time to start collecting fall data, some of them are kind of waning a little bit. So we're going to have to figure out a way to keep their excitement going into the fall from the spring. But it's really been a great program overall, and we only see it expanding from our plots that we have now. And I should also mention that right now we have about 40 different species of tree that we're monitoring throughout the park. But we definitely plan on making this a very long-term study and only adding to it rather than ending. So I definitely appreciate everybody listening, and I'm going to hand this back to Alyssa so she can take questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. That was excellent. I'm going to take back the controls here, and I just wanted to do a super brief overview of the resources that we have available for groups like yours that might want to implement phenology monitoring in your location. And so I'll just give a quick overview here and then show you where they are on the website. So a couple of good places to go are under Partner With Us on the main USA-NPN website. To start a local project, there's information on workshops, on setting up shared sites, which are those sites at which multiple people can submit observations, and different templates and examples of phenology trails that we heard a bit about today. Also under Partner, you'll find the geographic affiliate page where there's a map showing different local projects, and you might see another project in your area that you could connect with, perhaps to build a regional phenology trail, and you can also get your own effort on the map there so that our regular observers can find you and get in touch with you. On the Education tab, we also have a bunch of resources by audience under the Education Program menu item, and then as well as a Nature's Notebook curriculum and program planning resources. And I put asterisks next to the items that are going to get some refresh and some new resources coming out in this area in the next month or so. So keep an eye out for that. So here, Partner With Us. This is the Start a Local Project page where you can see example workshops. You can see information about how to get a shared site going, what that means, how to administrate it, and then some information on phenology trails. And then the Education Program has the resources the geographic affiliate, sorry, is here. And on the education program, the resources by audience and age group are there, as well as both lesson plans, activities, program planning resources, that kind of thing. So I think with that, I'll just turn it over to Lorianne to answer a couple of questions that came in during the presentation. And then I think what we'll do is, if you guys can see the little hand-raising icon, if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. And so we can have kind of more of a conversation with the panelists. But first, Lorianne will answer a couple that came in over chat during the talk.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, we have a couple of questions that are kind of actually quite similar in their nature. So the first question we have is, someone is from a nonprofit, a small nonprofit, and they're curious how some of these groups have recruited and retained long-term volunteers. So I think that's probably the most challenging part for anybody that's a site leader, or even for us, is figuring out how to retain volunteers. And there's no surefire way to do it that's like 100% proven, and it depends on your location, and maybe some of you are not already volunteer managers, so that could be even more challenging. But the things that I often suggest to people, if they're trying to get these volunteers excited about monitoring and just kind of keeping with it, is to make sure that it's important to you or the person who is setting up Nature's Notebook at the site, and making sure that the volunteers who are helping you know how excited you are about doing that, or what that means if you have that data. So that's the first thing to do, is make sure that it makes a lot of sense to them. You know, it's important to check in with volunteers regularly and keep it fresh for them. So if you can have a monthly or a quarterly meeting with them, make sure that there's somebody available to answer their questions, then they are going to be more likely to stick with it. And if you do it for a little while, you may be able to recruit a volunteer liaison to help you kind of organize that group of people. And the last thing I like to tell people is that make sure that it's meaningful to everyone. Volunteers are only going to participate if it has some sort of meaning to them and getting something, you know, valuable to them and it's interesting to them. So that's when they are going to be willing to stick with it. So those are the 4 top tips that I usually give people when it comes to doing that.
Cool. Do you want to hear from any of the speakers as well? What anything that has worked for them?
I guess I could speak a little bit to that. This is Jamie. So one of the things that we do with our volunteers is we have a preseason and a postseason meeting. So kickoff in February, we'll gather everybody together, and then we'll also have an ending meeting sometime in October or November to kind of talk about wrapping up the season. And in that ending meeting, we always hand out a survey that asks for feedback, a little bit about their favorite parts of the program, a little bit about what they would like to see change or what was difficult, and that helps us kind of adjust to their tastes every year. Every year we also ask them if they still like their walk. We don't glue them into one walk, so we kind of allow them to have a little bit of flexibility, especially because we do have such a broad range of plants. We really have the ability to sort of tailor their walks towards their interests, which is really helpful.
Cool.
Anybody else have any suggestions before I move on to another similar question? Okay. So the next question that we have is also related to volunteers' commitment and how much time is required. So I think this is related to how much time does the overall project take to set up and manage the data entry and the volunteer commitment in hours, and how frequently people make observations. So, I think it varies, and there is definitely a learning curve and a startup time that's involved with this. So it's good to think about how you're going to plan your program and how you're going to implement it maybe during the off time or the off season, so that you're not kind of frustrated with trying to get this going while you have a million other things on your plate. But once you get everything set up and you have the Nature's Notebook group set up on the observation side, and people have a basic understanding of what's involved and how to enter data, it starts to go relatively quickly. Once people understand what the species are that you're looking at, it's a little bit easier to have people do that. We usually suggest that observations come in maybe once a week, and it doesn't have to be the same volunteer entering observations once a week, so you can figure out how to manage that with the group of people that are observing. But you do want to make sure that you're not missing anything, especially during the growing season or when those life cycle events are happening. So just coming up with a plan for how you're going to do your monitoring is really important. And again, there's not really one answer to how much time this would take. It really just depends on, how quickly you can get things set up online and how quickly you can get a group of volunteers to start helping you make the observations. Let's see, we had
Does anyone on the panel there want to talk about how much time they've put into their effort, especially to kind of have a picture of what those look like at this point?
Yeah, this is Susan in the Smokies. One thing I'll add, because we have so many plots and some of them are hard for volunteers to get to, it takes a time commitment just to drive there. We've tried to set ours up so each plot has 4 or 5 people, different people, and they might be family groups, but 4 or 5 different groups or individuals for each plot. And then we've created a Google Calendar for each little plot. So when someone goes to visit a site, they can just put on the Google Calendar, visited plot today, and then someone else can look at it and say, oh, okay, so I don't need to go right now, but maybe I'll try to go on Friday. And we do tell the volunteers we would like to get at least once a week, but at peak spring and fall, we're really trying for more, like 2, even 3 times a week. So at most of our sites, the Google Calendar has worked really well. We've gotten good feedback from people that they like seeing when somebody else has just visited so they can plan accordingly. So it's just something that's worked well for us.
I think the Google Calendar sounds like, oh, this is Mary at Denver Botanic Gardens, sorry. I think the Google Calendar sounds like a great idea. I haven't really needed that. It did take a lot of my time. I unfortunately can't give you an idea how much time because I wasn't really tracking it, but getting everything set up. But now that it's set up, I've got some really dedicated volunteers, and I find that I've asked if they want me to find somebody else to share the position with them, and they don't. They've really kind of taken ownership of their trails. I've asked for a weekly commitment in general, with 2 or 3 times a week in the busiest parts of the season, and with the understanding that they just let me know if they're going to be out of town, and I fill in for those times, and that's worked pretty well for us. I feel like we lost something somewhere.
Okay, thanks. We had a question about sharing the data sheets that some of these folks showed, the partner groups. I did want to mention that we do have data sheets that are already available that can be printed out for folks who are doing just a one-day visit at a site. So maybe Alyssa's going to demonstrate where they are on the website or what they look like. I know they don't necessarily work for everyone, and people might have reasons for wanting to alter them or needing their logos on there, but the one thing that we do ask if you're changing them is to make sure they really are following the protocol, because this data is, has data integrity. When you're entering the data, we're all on the same page. That's one of the reasons why we started the National Phenology Network, was to make sure that the data were being collected on the same protocols. So just using those descriptions that we've already had when you hand them out to your volunteers, and using the different categories that we have for phenophase descriptions, just like the one that Alyssa has on the screen now. And they can be ordered in a way so that if you have plants set up along a walk, that they'll appear on the data sheet exactly as they appear on the ground. So,
of course, there's some things, I think the reason why folks out there make their own data sheets is because they are trying to customize it and get, if they have, ours has 4, but if they have 5 plants at a site or on a trail, they want to kind of optimize the amount of paper they're printing, or include photos of the phenophases or photos of the individual trees on there. So certainly we're trying to make it as flexible as possible in the national system, and then we understand that folks make their own data sheets. Some of those looked really good. But right, as Lorianne says, the point is to keep the definitions the same on those sheets. So the formatting might be different, but the meaning is the same.
This is Becky from Denver. So all of ours are available on our website as PDF downloads if people want to check them out. And ours do actually follow all of the NPN definitions. It's exactly what you said. It was just to fit more on a page that we reformatted and picked our species. But they're all the same phenophases and definitions that you guys have.
Great. Maybe we can put some of those links in the chat or in the follow-up. We'll make folks slides and contact info and a video of the webinar available, and we'll send that out to you, to everyone who's registered as well.
So we have one last question about data quality and how you handle maintaining data quality. Some of the visitors who come through make observations, but a lot of times visitors either don't know what they're looking at, this is the first time they're there, they don't really understand what the phenophase protocols are. So I wanted to ask our panelists if you all have any suggestions for what you do to kind of maintain that data quality.
Well, this is Becky at Denver. I mean, I think it also depends though on how much of your data is coming from trained volunteers and staff versus visitors. And I think for us, because we have a trained person, a volunteer or staff going out every week collecting it, even if there's data being collected by visitors, you always have something to compare it against. Even if that data came in on a Friday, but every Monday there's a volunteer going out and collecting data, you at least know kind of what was before and after that. So for us, it hasn't been as much of an issue because we do have so many pretty qualified, trained people out there, doing it. I think it would matter more if you're swamped by just the occasional observer without enough of your own maybe observations. I'm not sure how to handle that, but here it's because we have these trained volunteers that I feel okay about it.
And this is Jamie to kind of piggyback on that. I hate using paper. I think it's such a waste, but it's a huge, huge help when it comes to kind of vetting data, because I can sit at my desk and just thumb through one volunteer's data and it instantly becomes very, very clear where someone may be confused or where they may not quite understand what a definition is, and it makes it easy to kind of address that continuously with them. So as much as I hate paper, the paper data sheets actually make a really big difference for us.
If there's other questions out there, maybe you could either type them in or raise your hand in the interface and we'll call on you. I don't know if Cynthia, I've unmuted you. I don't know if if your question was already addressed. Okay, maybe she doesn't have a question.
I have another question on this list that says, how do you enlist families and how do you sustain the monitoring program? Again, I could probably throw out some answers to that, but if any panelists want to answer that, it sounds like Susan maybe has some ideas for groups of families monitoring some things.
Yeah, with our families, they just answered our call for volunteers for phenology monitoring. We have several sets of families that have adopted a plot, and the kids help collect the data as well. So it's we weren't specifically targeting families, but we ended up with them, which was great because the kids, I think, keep the parents motivated.
Cool. Kind of flipping back to the data quality question and thinking about what Jamie said too about the intensity measures being particularly hard for volunteers, so estimating how many flowers are on a tree and how many flowers are open. I guess a couple things on that. One is that we have a webinar coming up in a few weeks that is focused on intensity measures, so they'll be announcing that, and that's an opportunity for you or your volunteers to get more comfortable with intensity because we know it's a challenging part of the program. And then the other extreme from that, I suppose, is also to just, like Jamie is doing, not worry about intensity at all. And, really just having that status data is incredibly valuable for knowing when a phenophase started, when it ended, how long it lasted, whether it overlapped with, a plant overlapped with a pollinator. There's lots of good use for that status data without the intensity. And the Appalachian Trail AT Seasons, the effort that Susan mentioned, does have its own specific app that's kind of, it's a mobile app that's a simplified version of the USA-NPN protocols, and so it does not, it has intensity for animals but not for plants. And so that is kind of a lighter version of the program that we developed for that partner group, but there's no reason why that app couldn't be used sort of anywhere in the Northeast. It has a limited number of species, the species that the AT Seasons group is focused on, but that could work for groups. And we working with other partner groups, and especially like with a funded proposal, we might be able to develop a similar, simpler mobile apps for other partner groups.
And one other thing that I could add to that data quality question is to really think about the purpose for your collecting data. Is it largely because you are using this as an education program, and then that might be an indicator that you might need to develop some more resources for these one-time visitors to better understand what you're asking for? Or is it because they're part of some sort of data management question that you're looking to collect the phenology data, in which case you might need to think about ways that you could engage the one-time visitors who aren't necessarily trained volunteers in a different way to kind of get at that data quality to make sure that you are using the best data that you can possibly get for that.
Yep. Is there any other questions?
Nope. That's it.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions out there, I just want to thank so much to all of the participants for joining us today, for the efforts that you may be doing in the future or may currently have started, and especially to our 4 panelists for really pretty amazing programs that they're running out there. It's really exciting to see them, and I really appreciate them taking the time to share those experiences with us and with others. And hopefully we have our listserv, local phenology leaders listserv. We can send out a link to that as well, where we're trying to keep this kind of conversation going and support between different leaders. And then it would be great to have more webinars like this in the future where we can kind of share lessons learned. So thanks so much for participating, and happy fall phenology observing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.